Hello and welcome. My name is David Fielder, and this is the second half of Eugene Halliday's lecture, The Winter Solstice. That is when the solo being is standing in itself frozen in the ground. We've a pretty good example at the moment in our recent weather conditions of what it is like. Something that was fluid, heated by the sun, rose and became a vapour and went up, became clouds, comes down in the form of rain, comes down colder still, snow, hail, falls on the earth, covers it up, and then hardens. Imagine a human individual being hammered from the eternal, from the infinite, hammered onto his own centre, and forced by that hammering to individuate. Now, individuate means to be put into a state of dividuation. Divided from all other human beings. All the bodies in this room are divided from each other for one very simple reason. Infinity, eternity, is compressing itself onto everybody as a point of reference. Every single one of us is a point of reference for the eternal rock, Ruach, spirit, the infinite intelligent power. And when we compress down until we are totally incapable of movement, that is our 21st of December. That is our winter solstice. That is our great death. Now, if we do not die, we cannot resurrect. We can't have a spring unless we have a winter. If we look at that word Christ, and it is a mysterious word, and let's say, well, it wasn't exactly the word. There was a word in Greek, Christos, but it wasn't Christos. But in fact, throughout the vowels, and you have H-R-S-T, don't you? The ch-r-st, crust. The crust of the earth has dropped its H, hardened, lost its manifest power. But this word Christ is made up of the word for a circle, which in modern German is Kreis, plus T, which means a cross. So that when you say Christ, you've actually said a circle with a cross in it. And you know the circle with a cross in it, if you remember your physics and the rules of crystallization, if you get a saturated fluid, you take a simple one like water with salt in it, and you add more salt very carefully, and at a certain point you will overload it, and suddenly a crystal will appear in it. And that crystal will begin to accrete to it. Now, every human being is made in exactly the same way. Forces from infinity have come in, have compressed it, and it does not like being compressed. It likes pleasure. It does not like crucifixion. But if it doesn't get itself crucified, crystallized, made into crystallized form, it can never become to itself the Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is the city of peace. Every individual, to become at peace with himself, must first accept that he is posited there by the infinite and is crucified until he gives in. As long as you think you can get away with this and you don't give in, you're not crystallized. You're still fooling about in your fluids, and fluid is the symbol of sensuality. But when you get nailed on the crystalline structure, you have been nailed on solid logic, pi ratio, the papyrus, the name of the paper. Our word paper derives from the Egyptians, where Moses went to school, where Jesus went to school, where Joseph was master of the corn, where Abraham went to get his first fortune from a misguided Pharaoh. In those schools of mystery was this great secret taught. The thing that is stabilizing for all beings, if they can grasp it, is not the gross material rock that can be smashed with a hammer, but the rock which is ultimate logic. It is called the Logos. That rock that says there is no infinite individuated body that is not an infinite spirit intending to posit that body. When we identify with the body and we feel lonely, and then we feel deserted, and we feel cold, and we feel unhappy, that is our 21st of December. That is our solstice. But if we remember, if winter comes, can spring be far behind, we can escape that Scandinavian anxiety, that dreadful angst, that sense that our An, the sensual serpent, compacted in the ground of our own being, self-crucified by the intent of the infinite to posit gods. If we can accept this fact and sit in the middle of our total dejection, which in another terminology is called the dark night of the soul, at that point where we're absolutely certain that we can do nothing, that we can not do anything from our empirical, egotistic point of view, that we are utterly powerless, and we're in the grip of this tremendous power of the universe, and the name of that grip, in astronomical terminology, is Saturn. Now, Saturn is S-T-U-R-N, and it means the self-crucified being that is himself a power, which, through his own differences, has neglected and negated himself. Saturn means self-crucified phallic power, discriminating, looking for its pleasures, and because of the excessive complications of its pleasure pursuits, refuting itself. That is the terminal N in Saturn. Saturn is the ruler of winter, and the 21st of December is the supreme day of the triumph of Saturn, who is Satan, self-crucified serpent, sensuality, self-crucified. Now, it's very interesting because you can't stop people chasing pleasure until they get nailed by events. They will chase this ridiculous viandis fatuus, this will-o'-the-wisp. They will think that pleasure is something outside you, that you need to get an object to get pleasure out of the object. It is a total self-deceit, and it is a very passive negative concept. There is another word, happiness, which is far greater than pleasure, because pleasure means you are passing to the stimulating object. Pleasure means you are passive to the stimulating object. You are at the mercy of the object. If you define an external object as your source of your pleasure, one day that object will be taken away from you, and then you will be miserable. But supposing you say, I have no pleasure pursuit. You know, one cannot be a yogi if one pursues pleasure. What I want is absolute happiness. Now, our word happy is just the same, with a slight spelling difference, as the Egyptian hapi, H-A-P-I. And that means this power of actuality, of reason, the pi ratio function, hapi, positing its own individuality. It recognizes that there is no alternative but to individuate, because infinity, that is the supreme Goddess, is pressing on him and driving him to individuation, and there is no escape. When and not before we realize that there is no escape, absolutely no escape whatever, then we say, time to learn the rules. What are the rules? Now, at this point of the deepest darkness, this 21st of December, is the only point at which initiation begins. The driving of those infinite powers posit here in the center a point. That is the jot that Jesus refers to. That is the Hebrew letter Yod, a letter which signifies a point. And until you are nailed on that point, you cannot turn around. You cannot say back to the infinite until you've been hammered down to that point. Unless from that hard point you are fluid, seeking pleasure. Pleasure defined as a dependence on an external object. But if you say, I see the truth, this kind of seeing is not like that of the gross physical eyes that sees external formal shapes. It is another kind of seeing, the magical seeing, in which you see internally the truth of a proposition that all external pursuits are pleasures through external objective stimulation and are utterly vain and can never produce for you that which you truly seek. The ultimate goal of all beings, in Sanskrit it is ananda, it is bliss. That anand, bliss, means that the serpent is able to move freely at will and perform its own definitions from within itself and project its world, so that in no sense is it dependent on any external being or object or event for its pleasures. When we realize the mysterious meaning of hapi, that this hierarchical power activity posits the individual, and the individual then accepts this, that we are self-determinate, that the infinite absolute is the supreme self pressing in and positing and making individuals, and, as it would say in the Quran, whether you like it or not, you are being individuated. You can riddle, you can avoid it for a time, but all the time you are avoiding it. You are suffering more and more negations, being driven down to your 21st day of your December. Translate December as descender. We know that December is named after the december or tenth, but there it is, right down tener, means to hold. You hang on to your egotism as long as you can. You pursue pleasure as long as you can. And it is the infinite that is making you pursue the pleasures to teach you a lesson that pleasure is no good. But when you are having pleasure, it feels fine. But if it is externally dependent upon an object which can be removed or broken, it is not fine. It is not fine at all. Fine means end life, F-I-N-E. It means the end of life. And the end of life is an absolute, pure, spiritual self-determination. When you realize that, you become a candidate for initiation, and you say, a little piece of light, Yeho, let there be light. I see that I cannot win. Now show me how I can win. And the answer is, don't be dependent on external objects. Give external objects as much of your attention as you care to, and care, but not predominantly, not pendantly. Give them like you give water to a plant you're trying to grow, or a horse you want to keep alive. You feed it and groom it. Give attention, but require nothing back from it. When you do that, suddenly in that very darkest day, you know that with absolute surety, you can resurrect. You can re-erect yourself. You have been driven down into your saturnine, compressed state of black melancholy, and in the middle of it, in your greatest despair, suddenly you realize, that's weird. I'm a despairing being. Now, how can I be a despairing being unless there is a disparity in me? Despair means consciousness of disparity. Now, what is this mysterious disparity? It is the disparity between being a point located in space and an infinite of power intelligence which precipitated the point. This is the disparity that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt through our personal memory of our original source, which fascinated Socrates and Plato. We have a memory of all the processes of the human evolution, and we remember our divinity, and yet, mysteriously, we are totally identified with our profound stupidity and egotism, and yet we know we are infinitely divine intelligences, and we act as if we are not infinitely divine intelligences, but that we are finitely humanoid stupidities. And these two together are our original disparity. Well, a little bit of hard pie thinking there, says Pi. It was power, the P, that posited the I, the individual. There is a disparity, P and I. There is no word that we can utter that is not polarized in that way. And then we say, I must be self-imposed upon. Now, how do I get out of it? And the answer is by initiation. Now, initiation does not mean final enlightenment. It means the beginning of enlightenment. Adeptship is a much higher stage up the ladder. Initiation starts in your solar plexus, that is to say, in the sun. You get a feeling in your solar plexus when you make a mistake of depression. Do you not? Yeah, have you noticed a sinking feeling when something goes wrong? That sinking feeling is universal in the human race and also in the animal world, because that solar plexus is a very, very, very subtle brain and is much older than this forebrain. And that subtle solar brain in there remembers its divinity, remembers its solar origin. It remembers that it is fundamentally, unalterably spirit, and that the Rock of Ages is the true sense of individuated hierarchy inside one's being. And that begins the initiation. And then what do I want? I want light. I want enlightenment. Now, the word light is interesting. The word light says, bind yourself to efforts to establish the hierarchy within yourself and accept the fact of crucifixion. That is L-I, that means bind, to the individual. G-H is one letter pronounced L. We've given over pronouncing it like that because it is uncivilized. But they used to do it a long time ago. Let there be Luke. Well, that is a better word, isn't it? But it sounds coarse, almost Anglo-Saxon. But when you are prepared to say, only by personal self-effort of myself, having stepped onto the path of initiation, do I know that it is only by personal effort working on me internally, by my own internal effort, with a hard gamma, that g, that hierarchical with its g, crucify myself on this concept that I am divine in my origin, and all I need to do for the rest of my life is remember it and bring it into operation every day. It is said about eating food, only people eat food to make their bodies work and to get the energy to go to the opera or to have a fine time with a lady friend. But enlightened yogis do not eat food. They won't utter that word, the word that means food. They will utter parasana. They will eat parasana. But why are you calling it parasana and not food? Well, because to me parasana now, it is a magical word. It means when you pi ratio your functions, every one of them, all the material world that was gripped on that 21st day in winter, the whole material world in its gross solidity suddenly is seen to be spiritual, and that parasana means it is spiritual. You know, you thought you were eating donuts and smoked cheese. You're eating spirit. You know it? There's not a single particle of food that we eat that is not precipitate of solar energy. There is not a sun in the sky or a star in the sky, which is a local sun over there. There is not one of those that is not a precipitate of the infinite spirit. When you know that, then it is a spiritual act to shake hands with a gross-bodied millionaire. Oh, it's actually possible to have an intelligent conversation with Paul Getty in a spiritualized sense, instead of gross misrepresentation. Now, how does it feel if, in fact, at the very darkest time, sitting in the middle of our own beings and despairing, when we suddenly think that what is all this disparity about? To despair, I must have an ideal, and I must fall short of it. Is that not true? Despair is disparity. Unless I have an ideal and fall short, I cannot despair. If I have an ideal which I realize, I do not despair. If I have no ideal, I do not despair. The animal doesn't have an ideal and does not despair, but a human being has an ideal and despairs. Therefore, he has a disparity. Therefore, logically, in the middle of that disparity, you can say, because I have a disparity between ideal and falling short, therefore, I must be divine. I must be divine. I must be a divided being. I am at war with myself. Why? Because I remember in my amnesis, I remember backwards that I am originally sourced in infinite spirit. That spirit has come down, precipitated this body, and this is true for every one of us, whether we like it or not. The part of us that stupidly quarrels and fights, falls out, disagrees, especially just before Christmas time, that part is the grossest, most ignorant part of unenlightened matter. But the part of us that becomes aware of the significance of disparity as a proof of an ideal and the falling away from it, that is enlightenment's beginning. That is number one step. So then you say, I need light. In German, you ask for Licht. And ICH in German means I. And the L means to conjoin. And the T at the end means crucifixion. Let myself be crucified on this primordial, unavoidable, dialectical fact that infinity has precipitated me. And I have got to get back to infinity. But I've got to get back to infinity without leaving my body, because the infinite precipitated my body as a reference point. First in the gross material world to make sure that I couldn't get away from the lesson. Next, in the genitally sensitive pleasure world to make sure I don't want to get away from the body. Then in the commercial world that makes it good business to be tied in the body. Then in the joy world of recognizing there is even good business in enjoying yourself. And then you converge onto your solar plexus. You become aware, I need more light. And at that point, the sun begins to come up. It starts moving from the 21st to the 25th. And on that day, it is the duty, and duty means shadow of love, and it is the loving act of any intelligent human being that on that day he goes out, like Zarathustra, to the sun, and he looks up and he says, you have started to rise again, and so have I. And if you do that on the 25th of December, you are joining in that very ancient ritual of the original priest-kings. And you then joy the fact that you have been crucified, that you have had a very bad time in your personal winter, that you have been driven down to your solstice, and now it's time for your springing up, your resurrection. And with that thought, I leave you. Thank you.